It's time for Recipe of the Day. Americans don't eat as much lamb as a lot of other countries do, which I think is really sad, especially when it comes to lamb rib chops. They are just adorable and delicious when pan-seared. I like them cooked just to medium, but however you like your meat cooked, they're going to be wonderful because it is such a juicy and tender cut of meat. And in a lot of cultures, they always do fully cook lamb. So if you like it well done, you're in good company. And if you like it less well done, you're also in good company. Mine in this case. Now for this lamb chop recipe, I've done this really cool technique that gets some really good rosemary flavor into the lamb without ending up with lots of little rosemary flecks that are going to burn when you pan sear the chops. And so what we're actually going to be doing is dry brining the lamb chops by sprinkling them with salt, garlic powder, and black pepper. But then we're laying them on fresh rosemary sprigs with more on top while they go into the fridge for 2 to 4 hours. So the salt is going to penetrate and bring the flavor and juices into the meat. And when it's doing that, it's bringing the rosemary flavor in as well. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so before I tell you the exact recipe, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information. Like I said, these are the lamb rib chops. They are from the rack of lamb. They're usually sold already cut as little single bone chops, and that is what this recipe calls for. If you have the ones that are 2-bone chops, you're going to be able to do the same thing. You're just going to have to drop the temperature down after you sear them and cook them for a little bit longer to get to your desired temperature because they're thicker. So the ones that I'm calling for here are 3/4 to 1 inch thick, and you can buy them already cut into those chops, or you could get a rack of lamb and just cut between the bones to do that. I do have a video for that coming out soon, but it's not done yet. Now, these are most often sold Frenched, which means that all the meat and fat and everything has been removed from the bone for the last couple of inches of the bone. And that's why these are sometimes called lamb lollipops, because you can hold them by that bone to eat them. And it's really, really nice. Like I said, we're going to be dry brining these. And that is just because that is what is best for this cut of meat, because they're already tender and juicy. They don't need a wet brine. We don't need to add more liquid to them. And people could marinate them, but I find this gives you much better flavor, and you're not adding any wetness that could make these harder to sear. Because they're so thin, they're going to cook pretty quickly, and they're not going to be in contact with the heat for very long. So we don't want anything to get in the way of getting that great color on there in the short amount of time that we have. Okay, let me give you this recipe. So you're starting with 6 lamb rib chops that are 3/4 of an inch thick. Maybe they're a little bit thicker sometimes. And you are sprinkling them all over with about a teaspoon of kosher salt. That's total for all 6 lamb chops on both sides of them. Also a teaspoon of garlic powder distributed among all the sides of those chops, and a teaspoon of coarse black pepper. And then you're going to get out a baking sheet and put a rack over top of it, and you're going to lay 6 sprigs of fresh rosemary on that rack, and then you're going to lay a lamb chop onto each sprig, and then put another little sprig on top of each lamb chop. And there is a picture in the blog post recipe for this, so you can see what I mean. The sprigs of rosemary are cut to be about the length of the meat of the rib chops, so they're kind of touching the lamb chop in all places, okay? Now you're going to put that in the fridge for 2 to 4 hours, and then take it out of the fridge. You're going to remove and discard the rosemary. We're not using that for anything. And then you're going to be brushing the lamb chops all over with some cooking oil. About a tablespoon of it total is what you're going to need. And you can use whatever kind of cooking oil you like here. I try to not add an oil flavor at this point, so I'm not doing olive oil. I'd usually do like a grapeseed oil, or even like a vegetable oil, I guess. I usually do grapeseed oil, but you could do whatever you like to have on both sides. And then you're going to heat a large skillet over medium-high heat. And when it's really hot, you're adding the lamb chops in that single layer, so they're not really touching. Your skillet should be big enough that these 6 chops, which are quite small, will be spread out enough so that the air is circulating around them. And you're cooking them until they're well browned underneath. It's going to be about 3 to 4 minutes. And then you flip and you cook just until they reach your desired internal temperature. It's probably going to be between 2 to 4 minutes. I'm going to talk about temperature again in a second. And then You're removing the chops from the skillet and then letting them sit for 2 minutes before you transfer them to serving plates to serve. And that resting for 2 minutes and then transferring to plates is because we're trying to get them to have 3 minutes total of rest time minimum, because that's actually what's recommended by the USDA, is that you have a minimum cooking temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit with a 3-minute rest after that. That is the safest thing. And that 145 degrees Fahrenheit is going to correspond to the chart of doneness that I have in this blog post. It's going to correspond to medium there. And I'm just going to tell you that I ended up down such a weird rabbit hole and then doing a whole bunch of experiments, because when I was looking all over the internet and in various cookbooks that I have, the temperatures given for doneness of lamb were not really consistent. They had a fairly wide range from one source to the next. And so what I actually did was I cooked some for different amounts of time with a probe thermometer in them. And when they reached various temperatures, I cut into them and then did my own sort of judging, like, yes, that is rare and that is more medium rare, and came up with a chart, which in the end ended up corresponding pretty well with the chart for lamb in the all-new Good Housekeeping cookbook from 2001, which is one of my favorite resource books for this kind of thing, just like temperatures and times and basic recipes for things. I'll put a link to that cookbook in the show notes for this podcast episode for you. But yeah, so it corresponded pretty well with that. So I was really happy that it corresponded with something. So those temperatures are, for a rare lamb chop, you're taking it out at 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And after the rest, you want it at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Medium rare, take it off the skillet, 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Final temperature goal is 140. Medium is 145 degrees Fahrenheit when you take it out of the skillet, with a final temperature of 150. Medium well is 150 out of the skillet and 155 is your goal. And then well done, you're taking it out at 155 with a final temperature of 160. So those are the temperatures, and that chart is in the blog post that I've linked to here. I will also link to a homemade mint sauce recipe and a homemade mint jelly recipe, both of which go so well with the lamb and actually with those rosemary flavors too. It's like not the exact same herb flavor as we've done on the lamb, and so it's just a nice balancing going on. Okay, I will put the link to this lamb chop recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is January 19th of 2025. And I will just say that I am doing a survey right now of listeners to this podcast to find out what recipes you want to see more of, like what kinds of things and what kinds of guests you want to have on the show. All of that sort of stuff. I would love your input. It's a very quick survey to do. If you could head to cookthestory.com/2025cooks, then you can fill out that survey and tell me what you want more of. What kinds of recipes do you want to see on this show? Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That is at cookthestory.com/2025cooks. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.